Good afternoon. Look, I'm the last one between you and lunch, so look, I'll be super quick. I'm myself pretty hungry right now. Look, I want to take a slightly different slant, and it'll probably take about 5 to 7 minutes for me to get this thing through. You guys heard about this thing all throughout the morning, 27%. This is the India broadband penetration. Many of the speakers earlier today talked about 27%. This seems pretty small. Compared to the global averages, this is a pretty low number from the outset. But if you really dig down a little bit, it's probably going to give you a slightly different view. If you look at the urban India, the broadband penetration of urban India is a whopping 55%. This is actually in par with the Chinese broadband penetration. Not only that, the data usage, the Indian data usage is something like 9 gigabytes per user per month. This is way up with South Korea and Japan, which are fairly mature broadband markets. So let alone increasing or let alone getting these users to increase the bandwidth, how do we keep the users hooked down to at least for these levels? Now, before we dive into solutions, let's take a look at the rural. Rural, of course, we all knew rural is only 15%. But then again, we know there's a whole bunch of headwinds in the rural India. Of course, we got patchy coverages. Affordability is a problem. And as you know, our smartphone growth has pretty much plateaued. Yes, we got these feature phones coming up. And we have literacy issues that we need to tackle with. And many people talk today use cases. Just for the smartphones alone, there are use case issues. So it's going to be a while before that 15% going to increase. It'll of course going to increase, but it'll be a gradual increase. So we talked about 5G all morning. In order to fund 5G, we need to keep the lights on. For operators to keep the lights on, they better make our users to at least stick to that 9 to 10 gigabytes per month range. And how do we make sure when the operators increase the prices by a little bit, how do we make this, at least the urban community, inelastic to price? Again, earlier panel talked about the next big thing, of course, fixed broadband. Whether it is done through fiber or some kind of 5G fixed, of course, that's going to fuel some growth. Now, let me quickly dive to look at what Indians do with this bandwidth, 9 to 10 gigabytes per month per user. Again, you guys know this already, but let me just lay it out. Already, 73% of the internet is video, and it's largely leisurely activities. So let's further drill down into that 73%. This is pretty amazing. 90% of the top 100 videos watched on YouTube are in regional languages. Another interesting thing happening here in our market. In less than 2 years, the percentage of long format video has doubled to some 25%. Just as a reference, in US it's 63%. So all along, at least if you look at the last 2 years, it's mainly being short format videos. So, giving that user experience for short format is one thing, but when you start watching 30 minutes and beyond, maintaining that user experience is another thing. And the reason that long format video is increasing is the likes of Netflix and Amazon and so on, generating real premium local content. And of course, now we're going from standard video to high definition and so on. So what's my point here? In the previous graph, he said, okay, on average, Indian broadband users download about 9 to 10 gigabytes per month. Just to keep them hooked onto that, the number one thing that's going to be important for the operators is the user experience. Now, that brings to my last slide. Remember, I promise I'm going to make it short. We're all hungry. Okay, so we talked about some 75 to 80% of the internet content is video. That video is predominantly generated and consumed at the edge. If it is generated and consumed at the edge, it better get served from the edge if you have to maintain that user experience. Many of the panelists earlier on talked about that. This is about getting that basic foundation right. So let me touch on that real quick. So on this side, what you see is whether it is your wireless users or your broadband users, home users. What we see is a huge explosion in edge. We call it edge cloud. Again, it's broadly your fiber pops, metro edges, and so on. So this is where the biggest foundational growth is going to happen if we want to give that experience to our users either through 4G or 5G. In fact, this is not just happening in India, but happening across the globe. So the first, of course, the fundamental use case, the first use case for India is delivering that enhanced broadband. But of course, as many people talk today, IoT, delay-sensitive applications, of course, those use cases are going to come along. So if you can serve the content from the edge, you can clearly not only give that experience, user experience for the video traffic in particular and IoT traffic, but also operators can reduce the cost. But edge is different for the operators. It's actually more of a real estate problem rather than a technology problem, because you need hundreds of thousands of edges. The IoTs, who pretty much took away all of the business from operators on cloud, can't quite do that in a huge hurry because they can't have that real estate. They need time to have those hundreds of thousands of locations. So operators have a unique chance to capitalize on cloud. So of course, you got your edge cloud, you got your core cloud. So in Ciena, we're in the business of connectivity. We're the largest supplier of transport and switching in India over the last 4 odd years. So let me quickly touch on 2 fundamental things that we believe the industry in India should do so that we get the fundamentals right for 4G and 5G for that enhanced user experience. First is, how do you connect this edge to the core? In India, we call it regional or collector. Operators now trying to design networks to go from edge to the core. They're done with 100 gig, by the way. 200 gig and above, much higher capacities and leveraging much higher data rates and sophisticated control planes and making that network adaptive. Lots of work going in this area. The operators who get this right can not only reduce the cost, but also increase the efficiency of the network. But the real game changer is going to be, how do you connect the edge cloud to the end users? It could be the base stations or the actual end users. So these are packet networks. It's really this backhaul optimized packet networks. So we see these networks being able to handle a lot of scale. In fact, hundreds of, minimum here is 100 gig rates at the line side. And also convergence. We see a lot of deep optics being integrated into these solutions in order to make sure that you take care of this fiber exhaustion in the access. Again, deploying fiber in India is a very expensive exercise. And thirdly, and lastly, of course, routing. We believe current MPLS implementations require a whole bunch of modifications and improvements. We think in order to run this kind of scale, just to give you an idea about the scale, we're going to have close to 900,000 base stations not too distant future. So for that, you need more centralized SDN control type of routing environment. So we think things like segment routing are going to be a key play. And of course, finally, you need to be able to automate the whole thing end to end. Again, this is a quick snapshot on some of those foundational things that we are working with the operators. You got to get the, like people said, you got to get the fiber. Currently, our fiber penetration is only 15%. The target, as the secretary said, 60%. That's your most fundamental thing. Then you got to get your connectivity right. If you don't get this right, I think we're going to have some patchy experiences. With that, let's go for lunch. Thank you.